So we continue the parsha of Shalach. The scouts that were sent out to the land of Israel before the Jewish people entered the land. And there were 12 scouts that were sent, each one representing their tribe. The righteous people. They were sent on a reconnaissance mission, but they failed. They failed miserably. So we were previously addressing the concept of what was their concern. So we explained yesterday their concern. The concern of these scouts, the spies, when they entered Israel, was seeing the abundant materialism that was there. They came back with those massive fruits. The famous depiction that two people were carrying a cluster of grapes. The fruit in the land of Israel were like fruit on steroids. They came back and said, look at these fruits. If you think these are mammoth, you can only imagine what the people are like, what the land is like. There's no way we can conquer the land. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants. Did they doubt? Did they doubt that God can perform miracles? I mean, these are the people that experienced firsthand the mighty Egypt crumbling before their very eyes with the 10 plagues. They experienced firsthand the splitting of the sea. What were they thinking? Did they doubt that something like that was possible? So on a deeper level, what they doubted was not God's ability. They doubted their ability to survive and remain the people that they were supposed to be in such a land. It's a land that is filled with such abundance, such materialism, such material blessings. At the same time, it's a land that is surrounded by all other types of societies, all other peoples which have their way of life, pagan. There's no way we can survive as Jews being in this land. There's no way we can survive as Jews by being truly in touch with the physical world. That's really what was at the root of their agenda. They came back and said, either of the two. Either we remain Jews. That remaining Jews could only be in an environment where we remain separate, where we are not influenced by any outside influence whatsoever. The desert is the ideal situation. They had manna from heaven. They were nurtured and taken care of, both materially, spiritually. What more can we want? So I guess if you were to transplant the desert experience, if they weren't going to Israel, if they were going to Hawaii, that would be great. So the promised land will be somewhere like a Hawaii, like some island somewhere where we don't have neighboring influences. We're on our own.
Rabbi, wouldn't there have been a war, and wouldn't they be killing almost everybody? So the land really would have been theirs without all those influences.
Actually, no, they didn't have to kill anybody. They didn't have to do any of that. Maimonides speaks about it extensively, but Israel is not an island. In fact, Israel is the worst neighborhood in the world.
It was crossroads.
It's the crossroads. Israel is the crossroads of that time civilization. It was the crossroads. It is the crossroads between Asia, Africa, and Europe. So it is heavily influenced. It's right there. It's right in the middle of everything. But so we're going to get to that. That was the point. So the spies concluded there's no way out of this. Israel is in a place which is in the middle of everything. You can't get away with being in the crossroads and not have outside influence. Impossible. So we are in the crossroads. But why do we need to go there? We just had a revelation, the greatest revelation of spirituality. Why do we need to be in the land of Israel? Why can't we survive and be who we are where we are? We don't want to go. It's a land that will consume its inhabitants. So what was their mistake? Their mistake was, first of all, what their mission was. Their mission was to go and come back with a report. But they came back with a report plus commentary. They didn't come back with a report, these are the facts on the ground. They came back with a report, which included the facts on the ground. They brought back samplings of the land of Israel. But they came back with commentary. And the commentary is that we can't conquer the land. There was once a head of a newspaper that came before, that was having a discussion with the Rebbe. And he remarked to the Rebbe that we are completely independent and objective. Our newspaper is completely independent or completely objective. So the Rebbe responded, independent, perhaps, but objective, impossible. It's impossible to be truly objective. Everyone has a bias. So, yes, they came back with commentary. So we're saying now, is it possible to come back without commentary? Yes, it's possible if you come back just with the facts. But personally, is the individual completely objective? It's impossible for the individual to be objective.
You could try.
What went wrong over here? What went wrong is, remember we spoke yesterday about entering the land of Israel was to enter into a new phase. Leaving Egypt, being in the desert, for that initial period of time, was the infancy of the Jewish people. There were extraordinary, supernatural miracles that took place. That's no different than a child growing up at home, where their parents take care of them fully, 100%. You have your needs taken care of, not a worry in the world. I'll take care of you, Bubula. All will be okay. But that is not long term. That is not where the child should continue. Eventually, you want the child to grow up, and yes, to make the difficult steps outside into the world independently. And that really begins by allowing the child to begin to walk. We take those first steps. And when you take those first steps, the child is bound to fall. But that is critical. Allowing those steps slowly, but eventually the child being a growing and being a young adult to venture on their own. And when they venture on their own, it's important that while of course the parent maintains communication, it's important that the child maintain an independent self to make it on their own, because that's how their self develops. And then they can have a deeper relationship with their parents, not as parents as providers, but parents in their own right, having a relationship of who they are, appreciating who they are, yet with the respect of parents and so on. And yes, parents still, to some extent, may children and so on, but they're not their providers. So this shift was to take place going into the land of Israel. Into the land of Israel, they're now to maintain, there's not going to be supernatural miracles that happen every day like took place in the desert. That's not because God is taking a back seat. That's because God wants a real relationship. And that real relationship is that God becomes real in our lives. The only way God becomes real in our lives is not with everyday miracles, because then we're dependent on miracles. God is not real. My needs being met in a supernatural way is what's real. Real is when you have an inner conviction. What's real is when you develop something on your own now. Now the Jewish people, yes, they're going to enter the land of Israel, and they're going to have to plow their fields, and there's going to be neighbors, which are not the best neighbors in the block. That is a reality. But this becomes the beginning of who we are as a people, to be God's people, and to be a light unto the nations. That's why Israel is at the crossroads of civilization. Because we are to be the influencer, not the influenced.
Well,
therefore, where the spies went wrong is, on the one hand, they needed to go and see with their own eyes, how can this be possible? But remaining true to their mission, this is the critical point where they went wrong. Theirs was not to question if we can enter the land. Theirs was a reconnaissance mission, and therefore to come back with how we can enter the land, how we can make it possible. Yes, you may have your bias of how you can make it possible, but it's not a question of if, it's a question of how. Use your own Kepala, use your own mind, use your own ingenuity. Make it possible. How can you make it possible? Not if. And that is the critical difference, because on the one hand, there is faith. That faith is, I saw the miracles going out of Egypt with my own eyes. I saw the splitting of the sea. It's not a matter of if. Now that we're going to be doing it on our own, God is not abandoning us. Like a parent, when they see their child going off independently, the parent doesn't abandon their child. The parent takes a step back. Always watching the child, always being in touch with the child, but making sure that the child independently rises and grows. And if, God forbid, the child is in a critical state of danger, the parent may intervene. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of how. And the reason why they were not to remain in the desert, why that is not an option, is because the ultimate fulfillment of who we are as Jews and what God meant with creation is not to escape reality, but to be in the world, in a physical world, in a material world, but to reveal the sanctity that lies beneath it, to reveal the meaning and purpose in all of reality, not to escape reality, but to infuse it with meaning and purpose. That is who we are as a people. There's the symbol, the Jewish symbol, without getting into the whole history of it, but one of the Jewish symbols that we identify with is the Magen David, the Jewish star. The Jewish star is made up of two triangles, one facing upward, one facing downwards. That is who we are as a people. We are, our soul quests and rises upwards. We have to maintain, clearly we have to maintain our identity. And if the world tells us that we need to give up the identity, hide the identity, the answer is absolutely not. We can't hide our core. We can't hide who we are. This is our essence. This is our very being. Our very essence and being is that we are Jewish. We have to quest upwards towards a spiritual quest. But then there's the lower triangle of bringing that down into reality, into everyday life, into the business sector, into the world, into our interactions. It's not about removing ourselves from the physical, and it's not about destroying the physical. It's about the physical being what it is, but revealing the unique purpose and sanctity within all physical matter and within all humanity. That is our mission. And so overall, that mission is a sacred mission. We have no ability we are not to run away from the mission, because if we try running away from the mission, we put back on track. So what happened with these spies was a temporary pass from entering the land of Israel. God said, okay, if this is what you want, this is what you're going to get. You're going to be in a desert for 40 years. But you can't, eventually, the trajectory of the Jewish people is that you will enter this mission. You will enter the world. And this world is a divine world. It's not a jungle. And it's for us to reveal the goodness, the sanctity, the holiness, the meaning and purpose of everyday life, all our interactions, and all of humanity. That is really what the message of this parsha is all about. So we have to remember, we all have a bias. And therefore we should we should have, as a people, as individuals, a positivity bias. A bias which is based on faith, on the one hand, but then having both feet on the ground, how we can bring that positivity, make it happen. So it's not a matter of if, we have to use our seichel, we have to use our mind and ingenuity, how to make it happen. Let's not identify ourselves by the circumstances. Let's identify ourselves by our mission and our unique purpose. That is the overall message of this week's parsha. And in